A little bit about me. I grew up on the Bruce Peninsula up at Hope Bay. My father managed the Adair quarry, so I spent my youth mining, working in a quarry. I went away to school, did political science and history at Dal, did some stops in Sweden and Dijon, France. And then when I started my professional career, it was in sales. And I also did some international recruitment, traveling extensively in India and Africa. Currently, as Lee mentioned, I'm a sales guy based in Owen Sound. I work for Upper Canada Structures, and we sell the world's largest stretcher frames, really big ones, all over North America. Pretty fun. So as I went through my sales career, I realized that I'm probably best described as Gladwellian's social connector. My biggest strength is bringing people together, talking about things, getting people to interact, getting over the social hump. Now I like to focus on social enterprises. I'm on the board at the Wyerton Curling Club, active member at the Degrowth Collective. And I guess it's my involvement in the Degrowth Collective and community that's what brings me before you today. That, and I talked Lee into curling this fall, so I owed him one. So how did I come to Degrowth? Well, I'll start by saying I'm not an environmental optimist. I'm a doomer. I'm a pessimistic person when it comes to the future. I was sitting here in my little cottage on Georgian Bay, heading into the pandemic, and I was down in the dumps. I was feeling like nothing was changing. I was seeing my activism for the Green Party go to naught. And I just couldn't help this horrible feeling that nothing was moving, nothing was changing. And I started to look at why is it that we aren't able to make any effective change? After all, we've been talking about environmentalism for my entire life. I remember the 90s, I remember the first Earth Days and all those, and being active in that. And yet here we are, and everything's gotten worse year after year, time after time. So I started looking into systems, a lot of, economic systems, everything like that. And it got worse. I think my biggest epiphany, and if you look at this graphic on the left, it was sort of when I started looking at the human economy, like a trophic view of the human economy, sort of as we would like a food chain with, plants, animals, plants on the bottom, then herbivores, then predators, and building on up. And, when I was learning about that and realizing that as we get more, our society gets more complex, we keep expanding our material consumption. And then I learned about Jevons paradox, and I found out that every time we have efficiencies, instead of using it to reduce consumption, we are actually using it to increase efficiency and making things cheaper, more cost effective, and we end up using more of everything. And that goes with almost every time we have a technological advance. You see, a better steam engine just meant more steam engines, not, less coal being used. Then I started learning about peak oil, which is starting to look like we might have actually hit at the end of 2018. The numbers are a little juked. They're, putting in a lot of other synthetic oils and oil substitutes into the numbers now, so we, don't really, we don't see the whole picture. And then we found out about material shortages, and we just don't have enough stuff for the green revolution. We just literally don't have enough copper, cobalt, and minerals to build even one generation of renewable energy for the world. Then I'm saying, well, we're getting pushed to increase our population. Well, it's because we need to have a growing population to support our retirement program. So all of this was depressing, and I was not doing well. I was sitting here drinking too much, feeling like it was time to give up on the world. Then I came across a book. It was actually by Jason Hickel. It's called Less is More: How Degrowth Will Save the World. And, it introduced me to the degrowth movement, but what it made me realize, and it should have made me realize this, I should have realized it much sooner, that a lot of our problems are social constructs. We have choices, and it's a lot easier to change the way we do things than to do something like invent cold fusion or, build an entirely different energy system. And so that got me into looking at, well, what do we do as a society that is really our problem? What is our social paradigms that makes it actually impossible for us to make any progress at all in the environmental movement? And this is talking, of course, as a society, not as individuals, because as individuals, we can make it a thing, but make a difference. But unless we're acting in concert, it's not coming out to anything. You can see that by the numbers getting worse every single year without fail. So that's why I came to degrowth. And so what is degrowth, right? Degrowth is acknowledging that we live in an era of ecological crisis driven predominantly by excessive levels of energy use and resource use. High levels of energy use are a problem because it makes it impossible to decarbonize and get back within planetary boundaries. Excess resource use is a problem because it's driving all sorts of ecological pressures, such as deforestation, biodiversity collapse, et cetera, et cetera. Effectively, the other planetary boundaries, aside from climate change, are being affected by excess resource use. Then you have to realize that it's rich countries and rich people that are overwhelmingly responsible for driving the crisis. We, the rich people, as Canadians, have extremely high levels, per capita level uses of both energy and resources, vastly in excess of what's required to meet human needs. So degrowth, in essence, calls for rich countries to actively scale down their use of planetary energy and resources in order to bring our economy back into balance with the living world in a safe and equitable way. Our existing economy, right now, we assume that all sectors of the economy must grow year after year. You can see that is expected. We talk about needing to grow GDP every year. We need to grow our tax base. We need new workers. Every aspect needs to grow, regardless of whether it's needed or not. What we are suggesting in degrowth is we need a more rational approach to our economic production. We need to expand things like renewable energy, public transportation networks, public health access, basically the commons, and we need to scale back things that are less socially necessary, like SUVs, private jets, fast fashion, arms. We need to get rid of planned obsolescence. We need to advocate for the right to repair, which I'm glad we're talking about today. So we have huge chunks of the human economy that are organized not around human well-being, but rather maximizing corporate profits, corporate power, and elite accumulation. Now, I think this is a good time to mention that we do not mean businesses when we talk about capitalism. Most small businesses are not capitalist. We're talking about large-scale businesses that have a huge effect on the world, that are generally owned by shareholders that have a built-in growth imperative. So they have to grow. It's their fiduciary duty to grow every year. And if you are a CEO that doesn't grow your company, your job's on the line. That is an inherent growth mechanism. So, so when you start realizing that we have huge parts of the economy that are useless, redundant, and actually make our lives worse, we can scale them down if we make the conscious choice too. And that, of course, would reduce a lot of pressures on the planetary boundaries, helping us get back to within them. And we know from empirical research that we can actually improve the quality of people's lives and social indicators while enacting degrowth. This is even in rich countries. So we can actually, with conscious thought, make our lives better here in Canada while improving our environmental outcomes. So to that end, we're trying to organize the economy around the needs of humans, providing livelihood, providing the best possible lives, rather than organizing our economy around elite accumulation. We can meet human needs at a very high standard with a fraction of the energy use and the resources that we're using in nations right now. So this is the, short version of what I just said. Yeah, so that said, we need to shift everything and we need to shift how we do everything. We need to dismantle a lot of things in the economy. And it is such a Herculean task to really implement degrowth. I'm not sure it'll work, to be honest. The thing I like about degrowth is that it's a plan that we can work towards, and all of the steps that are degrowth are positive for the community and gives us more resiliency and will make us wealthier here in Grey Bruce if we're moving towards this plan. If we're putting in the social infrastructure, the physical infrastructure to live within planetary boundaries, if we don't do the radical change we're talking about, we'll still be better off and everyone's going to want to move here, and our economy is going to be great. So there's a lot of different visions of degrowth. Now, I'm definitely on the pessimistic side. I think we're most likely to come to degrowth by disaster. It'll be next to impossible to get Canadians to change enough. And I know this from just talking to everyone in my life, convincing them to, maybe give up flying or eat less meat or any of these small sacrifices that might make a difference. Most of the people I know aren't doing it. So that's my pessimistic vision. Luckily, there's a lot more optimists in the group, in the movement, than I am. And they like to think that if we do this properly, if we enact the plan to the best of our ability, we can hit a standard of living that's somewhat equivalent to Switzerland in the 60s and be within planetary boundaries in Canada. If we have public transit, if we have universal incomes, if we have job guarantees, and we reduce the amount of work we can do, we can really live well. So just to sort of give you an idea of the scale of the problem, this is a bit of what Lee was talking about when we talk about overshoot. We can see the consumption. And now when we're talking about emissions here, whoops, sorry. Crap. When we're talking about emissions in this slide, it's a stand-in for just consumption in general or a resource use. And it's actually quite interesting because resource use, GDP, and emissions all correlate. Anyway, if you look at this graph, you see that little gray area right at the bottom. That's where we need to get to live within planetary boundaries as a society. We're so far out of whack in Canada. We're the worst in the world. And it's not even really debatable. We'd have to get back to living within our means. And, the Indonesians are the example of what sustainable living is. So it's a really big job. I think going back to what Lee says, there's a huge component of, redistribution within the degrowth movement. And we recognize that while we're shrinking our economy, we expect that the developing world will increase there. So it's degrowth for us, pro-growth for the developing countries. And we understand that if we don't allow them to develop, then they don't have an environmental conscience. So you need to get people to a certain standard of living before you can even talk to them about environmentalism. So we're looking at degrowth and we're saying, this is the solution. If we don't implement degrowth, willingly or not, we're never going to get there. It's like running up an escalator that's going the wrong way. Everything we do is harder if we continue to grow. If we keep having this obsession with driving the GDP up, expanding the consumer base, expanding, I don't know, anything really. So we're trying to get back, reduce, and do it equitably. And I guess I like to think of the degrowth movement as the climate solution, where we have, a lot of people talking about, let's imagine we're on a sinking ship, I guess would be a good way to put it. And we have a lot of the movement, or a lot of people in the environmental movement, talking about building a new ship. We have another group of people that are, measuring how quickly the ship is sinking. And no one's going in and pumping out the water and plugging the holes. And that's where I think the degrowth movement can come in. So this is what we're actually fighting for in the degrowth movement. This is our actual stated collective actions that we want to implement as part of the degrowth movement, and we're advocating getting the world out there. Some of them are quite shocking, like a 15-hour work week, but that would have a really positive effect. It would drastically reduce consumption. We'd have to ban fast fashion. So these would be dramatically opposed by a lot of powers that be. So again, that speaks to my my pessimism about the movement, but I still think it's the only answer that makes sense to me. An interesting thing about the degrowth movement is that we are extremely democratic, highly democratic. We believe in local governance, decentralizing everything. We know from studies that if a group of people are left to manage a resource cooperatively, 60% of the people will, in fact, choose to manage it in a responsible way. And then only 20% of the people would be traditional capitalists, where they are going to take everything they need and exploit it at the expense of everybody else. So we know that by being highly democratic, we can organize we can run the economy fairly. And then, I mean, a lot of it is pretty left wing, right? We need to make sure that while we're limiting growth and shrinking GDP, that people are taken care of. We understand that if we're, shutting down the airline industry, for example, we're going to have to give people jobs. So we're very much in favor of things like an environmental job guarantee, which would also do great things socially, like, maybe kill fast food restaurants and low paying employers and all that good stuff. We'd also be in support of taxing carbon at the point of production, because there's only, say, 200 fossil fuel companies in the world, and it would be a lot more effective to tax them than to try and do it at the point of consumption. And then we would take that money and democratically distribute it across the world. So all these things are, very large concept, but when it comes down to it, it's stuff that we can start implementing here in our local community, setting up the networks and the social infrastructure that we need to thrive in a degrowth economy or in a collapse economy, to be honest. So here's a bunch of more ideas of the local communities: time banks, consumer councils. So we are actually deciding what we want to be sold in our neighborhood. Co-housing, community-supported agriculture. I think that's a great one. I always think of Eat Local Grey Bruce as a solution that's just waiting to happen, but it's not working very well right now. And I personally think that it's because of the profit motive, right? But if we could do something where we socially support it by having Eat Local feed food banks, for example, supply the food banks, they could get regular money, and so we could support them now, and we're going to probably need them going forward. I think we're in crisis now, and I think definitely within my lifetime, and probably within a lot of yours, we're going to see this stuff really coming into the future. And I really think hopefully if we do this right and we implement degrowth in an effective way, we can preserve some of the technological abundance that we enjoy today. Like, I'd really like to keep the internet, and I'd really like to keep a lot of the modern conveniences. But if we don't embrace the degrowth movement, it's okay. We'll still have degrowth anyway. It just won't be very much fun, and it'll be probably a lot more like the past with horses rather than the internet. So if anyone's interested in joining my degrowth collective, we organize on Signal, Instagram, and Discord. It's decidedly a younger crowd. That's why you're not seeing any Facebook or anything like that, or even email. So we do have an email list, actually. And we are active in countries all over the world. The Toronto node has 50 active participants right now. We have an Ottawa node. It's called the Snails Collective. And if you want to see degrowth in practice at a local scale, I invite everyone to come join the Wiarton Curling Club. I'm in charge of recruitment. It is a community-owned, completely democratic space without any kind of conditions on membership. We even have board games night if you don't like curling or you're unable to do so. And that is my quick overview of degrowth and the movement and how I came to it. And I'd like to pass it on now to our next panelist.
We have a couple of questions for Ted. I wonder maybe we can just buzz through those because there's just a few before we go on to some of our other speakers.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, okay. So the first one is from, sorry, hold on for a second, from Carl. Where does NAFTA fit into degrowth? Interesting question.
That is an interesting question.
Yeah,
So, I mean, that's trade, and that's largely corporate. Degrowth isn't necessarily against trade, and we think that it's definitely is useful to, like, make positive technologies and food and things like that are positive, readily available, and trade without tariffs. But at the same time, we could use NAFTA as a tool, and we probably would have to, because we're like legally obligated to follow NAFTA. We'd have to adjust NAFTA before we could actually stop, importing garbage into Canada.
So there is a role, and there's a risk, and there's also a role going forward. So that's interesting. A question from Danuta, and Danuta, you may want to add to this a little bit. Anyway, the question is, how do you target your audience? Danuta, do you want to explain anything more about that? Maybe it's my brain is, but maybe you got it.
We talk about this, right?
Okay.
The audience is tough because we really believe in the message and we think everyone needs to hear it. A lot of people have a lot of resistance to it. Business owners, whether they are, if they're publicly owned or not, hear degrowth and it puts their hackles up, turns people off of listening. And I've seen that firsthand. But what was I talking about for a second?
Targeting your audience. How do you target your audience? Yeah.
It's really well received by younger people, especially people who haven't experienced the extreme growth and wealth creation that we experienced in the post-war boom right up till arguably the 90s, or now, we're still probably in the good days. So the young people get it. These are the young people who are not buying houses, can't buy a lot of the stuff anyway, and are a lot more comfortable with it. And they also tend to be a lot more, feel that the environmental crisis is a lot more pressing than somebody like my parents' age, who got, I love the heck out of them, but they really can't get their heads around degrowth. And you probably know, Bevan and Gay, but I love them, but they don't get degrowth either. So I find it's really harder to get the older generations to understand. That said, it's so important, and we're on such a time limit that we tell everyone and let the chips fall where they will.
Gotcha. This is more of a comment than a question from Donald. Degrowth harkens back to reductions by a factor of 10 from the early 1990s, and he offers a Wikipedia link around factor 10, so that's something people may be interested in. And then Kay offers a question: how do you think we might motivate a nation and its political leadership to give up some of its wealth when we hoarded 10 times the vaccines we needed during a global pandemic? Interesting question.
That's a great one. So first, to the comment, none of this stuff is new. All the best thinking on degrowth was done in the 70s and 80s. We love Murray Bookchin. We love The Limits to Growth, which is probably, foundational in this. And yeah, it's not, nothing's new, but now it's more urgent, and we're seeing the impetus to act now, where before we could, we could selectively not see it, I think. Which brings me to the second question: how do we motivate people? Well, we appeal to their good nature, and we plead with them, and we promote the idea. But I don't think it's going to actually happen until times get tough, till we see hyperinflation, till we see oil that's $400 a barrel and people can't drive their cars anymore. And then when that happens, people will be looking for solutions. But we're all going to know what to do because we've all studied degrowth and have created the community networks and social infrastructure that is going to allow us to implement it at that time.